All right, what is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Chris, and today I'm back here with another interview, another one-on-one interview that I've been doing lately. And I'm here with Craig Eagles. If you don't know Craig, he's honestly been doing some stuff with Nitty Gritty in the past. He's done some shows with Yariv and Russ Cohen, and I wanted to reach out to Craig and do a little interview with him, talking about some of the things that he's done over the years. If you don't know Craig, he started broadcasting on TV, some local high school games in 2008, 2009, and then he's been writing about hockey since 2013 on. He's a scout for the Central Hockey League right now. Used to be a scout for the QMJHL and the New Brunswick region. So, Craig, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it, and I'm really excited to talk to you.
Well, thanks, Chris, for the opportunity to come back on. As always, all the team at Nitty Gritty do an amazing job covering the Flyers and covering the game of hockey. So it's great to be part of the show here moving forward.
Thanks. And honestly, I know we just kind of talked for around 20-25 minutes or so. I know we were just talking about the Flyers and all that stuff, but kind of just getting back to what we were talking about before. As I said, you were a scout for the QMJHL for 15-year-old players. If you were to kind of look at that and kind of look back on that, what are some of your fondest memories of scouting the Q, and kind of tell me how all that works and kind of how you got into it?
Well, it's a great question. I feel blessed and very fortunate to have covered 5 drafts with the QMJHL, and I started midway through the 2017-2018 season. So it's been an amazing ride, and I again just stepping away from the QMJHL regional central scouting job just after the draft this year to kind of focus on my other areas, other passions within the game. I'm still going to be active in the Maritime Hockey League with the Fredericton Red Wings from a scouting perspective. And I really hope to continue to cover the QMJHL on Rogers TV as a color analyst, and as a writer, cover the league on the FDS podcast network. So, it's kind of a 3-pronged attack from a scouting, broadcasting, and writing side. It's been an incredible journey. And like I've said before, every time going to the rink, I learned something new. I learned something new about scouting. I've learned something about myself and how to project players. But most of all, I've learned a lot from covering the league from a broadcast perspective and from a writing perspective. And to be honest with you, Chris, I think it really made me a better scout in that way. To get to your question about how did I get involved, from a TV broadcasting perspective, as you alluded to, I got a phone call at school on a prep period, and basically, hello, this is Natalie from Rogers, and I'm like, oh, did I forget to pay my Rogers bill that month? And she was like, no. Would you be interested in covering some high school girls games? And I said, I would love to.
An instant yes.
And
right.
Yeah, instant yes. And at the time, like we talked about off camera here to start, but at the time, my longtime coach and mentor, Dale Turner, was covering the Q as an analyst. And I still remember, Dale's been gone 7 years now. He was my coach for pretty much all my journey in the game. Tremendous athlete, tremendous player, and tremendous person in all walks of life. So anyway, I still remember standing at his office, and he was a vice principal at school, standing in the doorway of his office. And I said, Dale, man, I'd love to do what you're doing. You're doing such a great job. It brings tons of memories back from being in the dressing room and listening to you break down games and break down players. And he just looked at me and he said, Craiger, you'd be great at it. And that's always stuck with me. So when I got the phone call from Natalie LeMay at Rogers in 2008. I was just blown away by the opportunity. And
Right.
long story short, Chris, my play-by-play man, Will McLaren, that night turned into one of my best friends. And actually, a couple of years later, was stood up with me in my wedding. He was part of the wedding party in 2012. So, the game has been tremendously. I feel so blessed to be to have the opportunity to scout and to cover the game in those capacities.
Right. And honestly, kind of just to go off that, how do you think TV made you better with writing and scouting and stuff? How did all that kind of intertwine with each other?
Well, just breaking down the game and
Right.
I was still coaching the game at the provincial level and high school level when I started broadcasting. So I wore the coach's hat on the broadcast. So I try to break down the play and the players and just analyze, everything that was and kind of showcase everything that was going on and observe.
Yeah.
At that point, it made me a better scout when I had that opportunity. And that opportunity was through it's kind of a funny story. My brother was a teacher, still is, but he was kind of transitioning out of that profession at the time. And he had asked me, like, do you know of any NHL teams or QMJHL teams looking for a scout? So I had mentioned it to a contact and a source of mine. And that source basically said, I'll get back to you. Yeah. So we were we weren't on air that night at the old Moncton Coliseum during the Wildcats game. And it was second intermission, and the source came up to me, pulled me aside, and said, "Are you still interested in that scouting job?" And I said, "Well, it's technically it's not for me. It would have been for my brother."
Right.
So he's like, "Well, it's available. There's the Q is looking for a person here in New Brunswick." And I said, "Okay, well, great." I called my brother. My brother had already landed something else. And he said, no, I'm not interested. I said, okay. I got back to the source, and at that point, I said, I might be interested in that. So
right.
It was during the Monctonian Challenge. So one of the largest midget or U18 tournaments in Eastern Canada.
Mm.
And I had dropped my daughter off at ballet class, and the source had given me the phone number for Carl Bouchard. So I reached out at 9:30 on a Saturday morning of a tournament where they would have been up hours, like late wee hours of the morning, preparing their list. And that's where they create their first draft list for that season.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure I woke Carl up that morning, and he said, "Craig, it's nice to hear from you. Let's talk after this tournament. Give me a shout on Tuesday, next Tuesday." I said, "Perfect." So that was Saturday. Tuesday, we talked for 45 minutes. He talked about the expectations of the role and my background a little bit, and the rest is history. I met with the source that following weekend, and I drove to a game through a snowstorm the Friday or the Saturday morning, and then the following week I met with the source.
Right.
He really helped me kind of drill down on what to look for.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point I had already covered 2.5 seasons, maybe even 3 seasons on Rogers TV as a color analyst. So I knew the league, I knew the players, I knew, I've seen 16-year-olds flourish in the league. I've seen 19-year-olds. So that's our job as QMJHL scouts, is to project 15-year-olds at 19 within the league.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I feel like a lot of people will look at that and if something's off, or if it doesn't go to fruition, then you know what I mean? Like, it's so hard to predict. It's a 4-year gap. I mean, you're still growing at the time. Like it's such a hard thing. How do you kind of deal with all that?
Well, that's a great, phenomenal question. And really breaking down. And when I first started, year 2, I really wanted to kind of showcase what I was seeing as a scout. And I had NHL scout friends of mine reach out to me and say, Craig, what the hell are you doing? You shouldn't go on Twitter and what are these observations from the rink? Like, scouts don't do that. And I'm like, well, it's my way of kind of
Just a different way
showcasing.
of scouting. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to be critical of players or rankings or anything like that.
Right.
I was just going to say, this is what I'm seeing 15-year-olds, right? These are my observations from the rink. And that's taken on a whole new meaning, which is pretty exciting to look back at the roots and the foundation of that, and to see, the observations from the rink and where that's translated into. But I think that the most important dynamic in any scouting realm is, can they skate? Can they process the game? And do they have the skill set? Individual skill set. And then you bring in the intangibles. And those intangibles, Chris, are essential in really projecting a player. And the intangibles are compete level, character, drive, and motivation. And the drive and motivation, you don't see that unless you get to know the player.
That's all player personality and stuff.
Right. And for me, covering the QMJHL and then having the opportunity to write prospect articles for the QMJHL on their platforms was an excellent opportunity, because I was interviewing the players. Every interview, I would talk about their journey, their path to the league, which then I brought to, the midget ranks or the U18 ranks to project as well. And then, covering it, interviewing players and reaching out and then learning about their journey, from the Bantam ranks into the midget ranks. It's just been an amazing ride. And I'm, like I said, and I kind of sound like a broken record, but I'm very, very fortunate to have this opportunity.
No, honestly, I completely understand. I mean, if I was able to do that for a long time, I'd probably be the same way. Honestly, one thing I do want to ask, what are some of the hardest parts of scouting?
Well, I've been wrong.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to stand up here, or, stand in the rink, or, and profess to being the best scout. That I'm 5 years into this journey. And like I said earlier, I learn every time. I learn something new every time I go to the rink. And if you're not sharing and you're not growing, you're not learning. And let's stop right there. I pick the brains, and being central scouting, you're kind of neutral territory, right? So I could go pick the brains of scouts, and I knew most of the scouts from my coaching, past and that type of thing. So I would kind of pick their brains at every time. Intermissions, I would write my notes, and during the game, I would write my notes on players, and then the second intermission, usually that's when I would go talk about players, and I would talk about players, and then I would kind of talk about players within the league and within their organization and that type of thing. So it's really, really important for people out there to understand that you have to ask the right questions at the right time. And it's to ask a question in 2021. It's not a weakness. You're asking a question to a hockey person, right? It's not a weakness. It's a strength, because that shows them that you're willing to listen and you're willing to learn. And that really transcends the game. And from a broadcast perspective, here I am. I had the opportunity, for several years sitting in the press box, covering the league, talking to NHL scouts. So I would take those conversations into my scouting repertoire, if you will, and it really helped me grow as a scout and as a broadcaster and as a writer.
Right. And honestly, kind of just going back to what you were saying, from covering guys from under 15 to 18, 19, how do you kind of judge those years, and kind of just going off that too? Um, Obviously, this past year with the Flyers wasn't the best. They had a lot of guys with, obviously, they're a very young team. How would you kind of look at some of those guys' development, and kind of, is it easier to kind of attack a guy for the, the way that they develop? But from you seeing it from a different standpoint, from them being, 15 and so on, how do you kind of look at that, and how do you kind of assess their game as they kind of grow and develop from 15 to 19 or 18?
Well, I think what really opened my eyes, and that's another great question, Chris. What really opened my eyes, and I've talked about it in the past, but the Gatorade Challenge, the Q flew us, all the regional guys here from the Maritimes in Atlantic Canada, flew us up to Montreal and Blainville and Bras-Brillant, just outside of Laval. Beautiful area. And, it was my first opportunity scouting Quebec kids and 15-year-old. They were like robots. Right. They were so far advanced. And compared to the Atlantic kids, and just through sheer numbers and opportunity, but they were doing things differently from a developmental standpoint. They were way ahead. And I've had some NHL scouts and some QMJHL scouts, off the record, obviously, and no names, but they've said that some Atlantic kids are potentially a half year or 3 or 4 months behind their Quebec-based counterparts.
Right.
So really, there's been a strong push here in Atlantic Canada. If you've looked at NHL draft rankings and that type of thing, the Atlantic Canadian kids are really making a strong push right now. So that gap is narrowing. So I think it's really, really important for people to realize that this is a process, and that these 15-year-old kids have a foundation, and their foundation is they're trying to build on that every time. So, case in point, this season, I wasn't going to write a report on a kid that just sat out for 110 days.
Yeah.
Right. I was going to give them at least 3 or 4 games to get their legs under them. Now, I was still there. I was still watching on, online, on Instat, still doing all the homework, but I wasn't going to write a report. Oh, right. Well, Craig, you're not doing your job. No, yeah, I was watching, I was observing how it's those intangibles, Chris, right? It's the character. How are they going to handle this long layoff? How are they interacting with their teammates, their coaches right now after this long layoff, right? How are they going to respond to adversity? Those are the things that I'm looking for, right? I go deep. I try to go as deep as I can. And it's just not fair for scouts to be too judgmental.
Right.
And getting back to the point that I made earlier, I've made mistakes. I've missed Jordan Spence, but 18 teams missed Jordan Spence too. So Jordan Spence, 4th round selection by the LA Kings. They just signed him early. He was on Team Canada World Junior Championship this season, had a great season with Moncton, and then transitioned over after a trade to Val d'Or, had a great season. Val d'Or just came up short in the President's Cup. I missed Jordan. I saw him that year. He was ranked as an E prospect, okay, on our list, on our final list. I think looking back on it right now, he was at 262nd on the list, or something like that. Every team missed him. He goes to Summerside, right? Drafted in the Maritime Hockey League as a 16. He's a point-a-game player,
right?
And then all the teams were all over him. Lands in Moncton in the 2nd round. The rest is history, right? Best defenseman in the league, rookie of the year from a defensive standpoint, right? I take Jordan Spence with me every time I go into the ring. And there have been lots of players that I've potentially missed on. But those are the players that I try to project and try not to make that mistake. But as you alluded to, Chris, it's a process, and it's very, very subjective and it's very objective at times as well with regards to, are you relying on your experience? Are you relying on, what you've learned and what you've seen about the player or what you've heard about the player? And that's where you have to divide that and really say, this is my experience. This is what I'm observing. This is what I'm looking at.
Right. No, I 100% agree. And honestly, and kind of going off that too, how do you kind of think scouts are looking at this year's draft with the NHL? Because there's it's such a weird draft. I mean, nobody even knows who's going to go first overall. I think all of the other rounds are kind of just like shoe-in picks at that point. It seems like every list is different. There isn't really a number of who's going to go where. There's so many different things. How would you kind of look at that? And just another thing to add, how did you kind of take injury as well? If guys were injured for a long time, say like a torn ACL or maybe like concussions or something like that, how would you kind of look at that and kind of add that into scouting too for those years that they would kind of grow up?
Well, from a Quebec Majors Junior Hockey League perspective, you're really drilling down on their underage year, Chris.
Yeah.
Right. What did they do last season? And I think a lot of NHL scouts have already done their homework last season.
Yeah.
Right. They had their notes. They do all the work on underage kids. Coming into this season, scouting world changed with Instat, going online, comparables, all those things. It was hard. I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke. It was very, very challenging. The kids would be upstairs watching their morning cartoons, either Saturday morning or Sunday morning. I would come down, set up my station here, and I would watch Instat for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
And individual shifts, games, highlights. I'm not a big person on highlights. So whenever I would go watch their goals and assists or their points, I'd already seen every shift that game.
Right.
I would go in and look at their goals and assists.
Right.
So from an injury standpoint, that's what you're looking at. And, to answer your first question, from an NHL scouting perspective, because I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of NHL scouts this season here locally in the region and abroad. Obviously they don't talk about, their lists at all.
Yeah.
But they do talk about the work that they've done. Every NHL organization likely hired a regional guy. Even if they didn't announce it, they hired a regional guy here in Atlantic Canada. And those regional guys are going to have a tremendous impact on the organization and on this draft. And that's the trust factor.
Yeah, you have to have
that region. Exactly. The regional scouts are going to have more say in who the organization is going to target coming into the draft in a few weeks. It was the same way in the QMJHL draft. On the coverage that night, you could see that organizations were targeting the best player, but they were also targeting, they're going off the board. Well, no, I covered it for Eastlink. They didn't go off the board. They just targeted different needs.
Right.
Right. So you target
I think a lot
player
of people,
and skill set. Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I think a lot of people kind of misinterpret what that means. Like best player doesn't necessarily mean like best player on the board. It's more best player from what the team has. So
right. And it's all about it only takes one team to like you, Chris.
Right.
Right. And they'll draft.
Yeah.
So that's what's so unique about this. And the coverage that night of the QMJHL draft, my other colleagues were saying, broadcast colleagues from Eastlink were saying, this was a little bit off the board. Well, our list, which at the CSR at the time, let's say the kid we had him at 23. Well, it doesn't matter if we had him at 23. That's our list. That's where we projected him to go. Right. Obviously, Rimouski had him higher, or Moncton had him higher, or Halifax had him higher. That's what's so subjective about this. And obviously, everyone targets the best player available. And they always say that, Chris. But in the later rounds, you're going to see organizational need come up, right? Every team will draft a goaltender in the QMJHL draft. Usually that goaltender and those goaltenders go around round 5 or round 6. This season, it was, or this year in this draft, it was round 6. I think there were 4 or 5 that were drafted during that round.
Yeah, and again, I kind of just wanted to go back to what you were saying about the highlights, like, you know, kind of looking at that stuff, because I've always noticed too, when looking at, like, if I go to, you know, say I'm looking at a player for the Flyers, or I'll look up somebody, there's been a couple guys that I've done some work on for this NHL draft, and all the highlights I find are just goals, assists. It's all so offense heavy, when I'd rather look at them shift by shift, or look at defense, or, you know, special teams, whatever. I think there's always like a big gap with that. So I think it kind of, it's tough when you can't watch it. Like, for me, it's different from, you know, being in the US and everything. There's only so much hockey you can watch. And I know it sounds weird, but obviously in Canada, you obviously get more hockey coverage where you can watch those games. The only games I really get, if they are the Q, it's on NHL Network, and it's usually like a Saturday night or something like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, kind of just going off that too. One thing that I've always kind of wondered with scouting is, if you ever do mess up, is there ever a big kind of, you know, I don't know if it's I'm trying to figure out how to describe it, but is there ever a huge thing where maybe you get in trouble or anything, or is it kind of just like it just happens?
Well, great questions again, Chris. And let's tackle the first question first. Instat was a remarkable tool this year, and I hope to be continuing to use it moving forward, because it's a great supplement. There's no substitution for the eye test, but when you can't get to the rinks, when you're not allowed to go to the rinks because of COVID guidelines, you have to use all different alternatives.
Right.
Spoke to an NHL scout recently, and they enjoyed, obviously it was different, but they enjoyed the offensive side from Instat, but they really struggled with the defensive side, because as a cameraman, you're following the puck. You don't see the play away from the puck. And, you know, I talking with the NHL scout, I tweeted a few things out, and I'm not sure if organizations picked up on it or not, but the next, I think it took about 3 weeks, but they changed the perspective. They moved the camera on the other side of the rink, Chris. So they could see, so I could see as a scout, the interaction with the players and how they change and, right, get on and off the ice. It's remarkable. Those little things that, as a scout, that you're watching for, right? How does the kid handle a bad shift?
Right.
What's their body language like? Body language is a great indicator of character. It really is.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've tweeted this out in observations from the rink. As a young player, you want to be seen, right? Everyone wants to be seen. They want showcase. They want to showcase their talent. You don't want your body language to be the reason why you're being seen.
Right.
So that's the first question. The second question, really, you know, doing a deep dive on Instat, and you're going to make mistakes, Chris.
Yeah.
In the scouting world, you're going to make mistakes. And this is where the stakes get higher with regards to, you know, I've already alluded to, it was neutral territory. My job was ranking players. And as a central scouting team, we really, in years gone by, pre-COVID, we ranked the first 5 rounds. So that was our job. And again, that's our team, right? If the QMJHL had a 19th team, it would have been the central scouting. From a scouting perspective, it was a central scouting list.
Right.
So we take a lot of pride in trying to get that right. Every organization takes a lot of pride in getting that right. You won't know if you don't, right? If you won't know if you've made a massive mistake until months, maybe years after.
Yeah.
right? Because whenever you're projecting development of any age group, there's going to be mistakes because it's a maturation process, and everyone develops and everyone grows at a different rate. We all know that.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is unique. So I've seen some, Zach McEwen. Let's bring up Zach McEwen, forward for the Vancouver Canucks.
Mm-hmm.
Zach McEwen came to Moncton, signed as a free agent at 18 years old, played junior A, and they took a chance on him. At 19, he was phenomenal. The Moncton Wildcats didn't have room. They were entering kind of a developmental rebuild structure. They probably should have kept Zach. They went a different route. They moved Zach to Gatineau. Mm-hmm. So Zach McEwen was fighting tooth and nail for a spot as an overage within the QMJHL. You look at his stats and his progression. Now, here's a kid that was, kind of a late bloomer. At 20 years old, Zach McEwen was 6'4", 200-pound power forward with great mitts and had a phenomenal season.
Right.
That parlayed into an AHL contract, which parlayed into a National Hockey League contract. Undrafted, right?
Yeah.
And, when we're talking undrafted players, look at his teammate in Vancouver, Matthew Highmore. Mm-hmm. Look at Philip Myers.
Yeah,
look at Ross Johnson. Mm-hmm. All those players go undrafted. And there's a lot more, I think a lot more emphasis on development and projecting. Right. Jonathan Aspero here, again, locally playing for the Moncton Wildcats. Jonathan, another perfect example, comes into the league as a 17, plays forward. He's a defenseman. Mm-hmm. Okay, to make the team, they had to move him up front. They didn't want to lose him. Let's move him up front. He turned into one of the best third-line centers in the league that year. Forechecking forward, two-way forward, right? Situational guy, could play the power play, could play the penalty kill. And then when it came time to move him back to the point, he was ready.
Right.
Goes undrafted, signs a pro contract at 20, plays in Belleville, mm-hmm. right? Signs really an East Coast deal and an American Hockey League deal, earns the American Hockey League deal, and is on the taxi squad for the Ottawa Senators breaking out of camp this year. Ended up on the taxi squad late. I thought he was going to get a couple games in, but he will play National Hockey League games
right
moving forward. So you can never really tell, mm-hmm. right? And so you can look at it and use all your experience, all you want. Mm-hmm. It's up to the individual. It's those intangibles, the character, the drive that you can't necessarily evaluate. You can drill down and you can talk to teachers and NHL scouts. Hey, I've heard a few sitting outside of rinks, watching the interaction with the kid and the parent as they get out of the car as 15-year-olds.
Yeah.
These are NHL scouts making these phone calls to teachers and we're seeing more and more of that from a character perspective. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're going to make mistakes, Chris. And those, unfortunately, those mistakes sometimes cost you your job. And
right.
just, we can sit here and criticize. And this is why I'm very, I don't criticize openly on social media. I try to stay as positive as I can.
Right.
These are the livelihoods, right? Like people, this is their job. Mm-hmm. And there's so many fans out there that criticize the moves that these scouts make. I don't see them in the rinks, Chris.
Yeah.
Right? I don't. Mm-hmm. So it's time and effort. It's their livelihood. And I know, if they're getting paid, it's their job. I get all that, and I agree. It's their job. Mm-hmm. But in the hockey world, as a coach, you can do an amazing job,
right.
Phenomenal job, and still get let go. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that from like just NHL coaches. I mean, there's a lot of good NHL coaches that have a really short span with teams. I know like Mike Keenan was one. He was one of the best. He's arguably one of the best head coaches for a lot of teams. And how many teams did he bounce through? You know what I mean? The head coach of the Flyers. Obviously AV, right? He's been to the Cup final twice. He's bounced from a handful of teams. One thing that I did want to ask is that I know that you said before that you are a teacher. Have you ever taken anything from teaching and kind of put that into scouting or writing or broadcasting or anything like that?
Well, I teach 15-year-olds every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be teaching, my teaching schedule kind of changed. So heading into next year, I'll be teaching grade 9 and grade 10 and some upper level stuff. So yeah, you always have to take what you've learned from a teaching perspective and the maturity level and the experience. What are these 15-year-old kids experiencing in their day-to-day lives? What type of student are they? And I think, projecting that, seeing that on the ice, they're just kids.
Yeah.
They're kids. And they're kids at the Q level too. They're kids. We think, oh, well, they're at the QMJHL level. They're this, they're that. Oh, well, they're an NHL draft, right? Prospect or draft. I really, really think that we've got to take a step back and learn a lot from, you're scouting the person, but you're scouting the player as well. And you're scouting the player and the person. Those are interchangeable. I think from a coaching perspective, you're coaching the player and the person these days. And really, you have to reach the person before the player comes around. So that's a phenomenal question. It's really helped me kind of understand, and then interviewing the players and getting to know their families a little bit from being at the rink. You can pick up on character,
right?
So many, every player, every kid has a story. Some of those stories are of adversity, some are triumph. But you really kind of drill down and get to know them on a personal level, and you can see their adversity that they face throughout their lives. I look at Jacob Melanson. He's going to be hopefully drafted in a few weeks. Jacob, first rounder in the Q by the Quebec Ramparts. I believe he was 15th overall a few years back. 2 shoulder injuries. Looking for a change of scenery. The Acadie Bathurst Titan reach out to the Quebec Ramparts. They strike a deal. 2 second-round picks go back to the Ramparts. Jacob Melanson comes down, gets himself ready, and rehabs both injuries and has a fantastic season. And now we're talking about NHL Draft. It's a phenomenal journey, and it just goes to show that it's a process and it's a progression. And if you're really willing to put all the time and effort in as a scout, as someone in the hockey world, and as a player, if you really want it, you'll get there.
No, I honestly, I think that's great. Craig, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. This was amazing. A lot of good insight. And Craig, if you want to say anywhere where people can follow you, read your stuff, you please do that.
Well, one more thing, Chris, that I'd like to add here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just caught up with Phil Myers the other day. Very reflective, very transparent, honest, and upfront about the season that he had, the adversity that he dealt with from COVID, with regards to just how the season transpired, injury woes, and not being able to interact like usual,
right,
with family and friends and especially teammates. I just think Phil Myers is going to have a terrific rebound year. I think the Philadelphia Flyers are going to turn a lot of heads this season, coming into this year. And I think you're going to see the Philadelphia Flyers make a strong push into the playoffs. And I think they're going to make some noise this year. Again, I predicted they would be a cup contender.
Yeah.
But it's a young team. And I think, Chris, I think people really need to realize that this core group in Philadelphia mirrors a lot of core groups around the National Hockey League. You look at Boston, sure, they have the veteran presence, tons of questions in net now with Tuukka Rask and Carter Hart and all these questions on the back end, right? You had Chara leaving. You had the Bruins try to bring in some young youth, defense on the back end. Philadelphia needed to add another defenseman. They need some more depth up there. You have two solid scoring lines, but now you're looking at trying to implement young players within your core group. I think there's a lot of similarities across the league,
right?
And I think it's really going to be interesting to see the expansion draft, to see what goes on in a few weeks with the NHL draft, and you're going to see, which we've already started to see, lots of movement and movement to alleviate cap space. So I think it's really, really interesting and exciting times here for all the fan bases across the hockey world. But thanks again for the opportunity today, Chris, and continued success in everything that you do and here with Flyers Nitty Gritty.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate it. And if anybody wants, Craig, if you want to just say where people could follow you, your drop your Twitter.
Sure.
You there
at Eags, so at EAGS 37. You can catch us on the FDS Podcast Network, and as I alluded to earlier, we're starting a new independent scouting platform. Really going to look and showcase players, up-and-coming players here from Atlantic Canada and Quebec on In Focus Scouting, and you can catch all that and those articles and feature interviews on the FDS platform and on my platform as well. Still uncertain if I'll be writing for the QMJHL again this upcoming season. Hopefully that'll come to fruition. And again, hopefully Rogers will be broadcasting Moncton Wildcats, St. John Sea Dogs games, and Ackley Bathurst Titan games here regionally in New Brunswick.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Craig. It was a great time and an awesome interview. Remember, guys, podcast articles, those links are on my channel. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'll see you guys in the next one, and goodbye.